Hi, welcome to the Wonkette Weekend Live Chat. I am Robin Panacchia. This is my lovely co-host, Stephen Robinson, and the lovely and talented Lil Miss Hot Mess is joining us today. And we're all going to pretend that this thing situation isn't happening. I'm not going to cry.
Thank you. So, thank you so much for joining us and Lil Miss Hot Mess. You've been, one thing I was going to write was that Marco Rubio is a hot mess, but not the fun kind.
Yeah.
And you've been sort of a target specifically by him, drag queens in general. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how he's chose to attack you and Drag Queen Story Hour during the middle of a hurricane? You please.
Yeah, so I woke up about a week ago to a message from someone in Florida who sent me this campaign video that Marco Rubio had been running that used an image of me and, that kind of typical, like, scary voice of political ads saying things like, the liberals are coming for you. They're out here indoctrinating your children and trying to turn boys into girls. And it used some images from a story hour I had done, as well as one that my friend Panda Dulce had done. And it was airing literally on the Weather Channel during Hurricane Ian, while it was pummeling the state of Florida. And I know many other politicians have intentionally pulled their political advertising during that event. But of course, Rubio just, kept on plowing forward with the hateration and, for some reason was more obsessed with me than he was concerned with the people of his own state.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think Democrats had sort of explicitly pulled advertising during the hurricane for that governor's race and Senate races, and he chose not to. And it wasn't, God forbid, anything about climate change, but specifically targeting you and the demonization. And Robin and I have talked about this for a bit of where what was clearly sort of anti-trans but anti-queer rhetoric that has been sort of repackaged as targeting children. So it's, they are targeting children. They are sort of this othering.
They've always been doing that, though. Like, that was like their game back in, the 80s and 90s. And now they're just sort of like bringing it back because basically they had a hard time. They realized they weren't going to get people to go along with them anymore on the like, oh no, gay marriage is going to ruin your life. And so now they're going back to their old playbook of, oh, they're coming for your children. Like, basically.
And so just to clarify, you are just someone basically reading to children. And I know that I call it the Marjorie Taylor Greene's supervillain origin, because she had essentially decided to run. One of the reasons she says for running for Congress was that there was a drag queen story hour in her community, and no one would listen. No one would listen to me, and well, whether it was that loud, And so, I try to be fairly to get in the minds of someone from why this is an issue for you or whatever. Why don't you want me living in your neighborhood? Okay, I've been there. Like, what is this? But this is like adults spending their time to read to children. Like, what's next? Are they going to attack old ladies feeding pigeons? Like, which you shouldn't feed pigeons. That's actually bad. You shouldn't feed birds. But reading to children and exposing them to kids love dress up. My son, I have an 8-year-old. He's so excited about Halloween. He's always talking about it's like what costumes wear and how I will get involved in the whole thing. That's totally love. This is such a wholesome thing, and I don't. So could you just tell us a bit about how you started this, the work you do, sort of the positive impacts you've seen and what it has? Because I feel like people need to know this beyond Rubio's silliness.
Yeah, so I should say that I can't take credit for the idea of Drag Queen Story Hour. I'm just one of the loud queens who's been involved from fairly early on. But the program actually started in San Francisco in 2015, and it was started by Michelle T., who is a queer author, novelist, memoir writer. And she was looking for a place to bring her young son to expose him to a little bit of queer culture and to find LGBT community that in ways that were appropriate. She at the time ran an organization called Radar Productions along with Julian Delgado Lopera and Virgie Tovar, and they cooked up this idea of Drag Queen Story Hour. And it was, one of those things that I think was so simple and so crazy, but not crazy, that it just might work in that, basically all you needed was drag performers and some books and a library or other space to do it in. And the magic was born. And Drag Queen Story Hour quickly spread around the country and around the world. And we now have more than 50 chapters in places like San Francisco, but also Raleigh, North Carolina, El Paso, Texas, here in Arizona, also Tokyo, Copenhagen, Mexico City, all over the country and all over the world. And yeah, we do what we sound like we do. We read books to kids, we sing songs, we do some movement activities. Sometimes we'll do an arts and craft project or do face painting. But it really is just like any other typical story hour that you might stumble into in your library. It's just that the performer happens to be a drag performer, whether that's a drag queen or a drag king or some other fabulous being. So there's really, as far as I'm concerned, nothing for folks to be getting their panties in a bunch about. Yet they still can't help themselves. I don't know.
Well, there's also this inherent sort of sexualization of drag art and drag performance, as if it were cis women in wonderful outfits, they would say nothing. Reading to children, it would just be but they seem to, the very existence of queerness is somehow contaminating to young people, which is obviously a horrible statement, and that a sitting senator is promulgating this is repulsive. I mean, there's no other way around it, because it's clearly and what's worse, in Florida, Ron DeSantis was talking about, even because obviously you guys aren't dragging people off the streets and forcing their so then he's like saying, if parents choose to bring their kids to these events, that is somehow child endangerment, which is horrifying. It's like the state saying this is what, and I'm sure Ron DeSantis has been to a Hooters with his kids.
Oh, I'm sure.
So it's this really grotesque thing. And there's been, this is not just kind of empty insulting rhetoric. It is like of an active threat to folks like yourselves, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that this rhetoric has become more and more mainstream. We as Drag Queen Story Hour have been being called terrible names, groomer, pedophile, other similar names, since basically we started doing this work. And for a long time, people weren't paying attention. And unfortunately, in recent months and in this past year, more and more mainstream politicians have really started echoing that. And I think it's really dangerous to see this kind of mainstreaming of what once was more fringe, kind of radical right rhetoric really coming into the fold of conservative politics here. I don't think it's a surprise that politicians like Marco Rubio have upped their rhetoric as we've, seen legitimate threats and legitimate attacks from groups like the Proud Boys, right? Mm-hmm. Rubio is directly echoing those sorts of attacks in his rhetoric and in his own attacks on us. So and they're getting literally violent.
Yes. The Proud Boys and whatnot. Have you experienced any of that at all?
Fortunately, I personally have not had to deal with that with any of my events, although, of course, as an organization, we are monitoring that and working on our safety protocols and have been doing things like safety trainings to make sure that not only our storytellers, but also our audiences are as safe as possible. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create safe spaces for people to play, to have, open up their imaginations, to open up their minds, and to express themselves. And, it's not even a shame. It's terrible the way in which, these groups are threatening real violence against us. and against children. I mean, they're the ones who claim that we're somehow harming children, and yet they're the ones who are obsessed with this idea that we're sexualizing children. They're the ones showing up with guns at our events. So it's terrifying.
Yeah, and Rubio had specifically said something about, turning boys to girls. That's very creepy in that specific ad. And one, that's obviously not what you're doing.
Not how it works.
But also,
that's not how anything works.
Right.
But at the root of it is sort of this idea that any support of trans kids or kids who are basically gender nonconforming. I mean, we've hopefully over the past decade or so gone for the sense of like creativity, exploration of gender and who you are. It's not just rigid. Okay, here's your, go play with your He-Man dolls and don't. But it's okay. It doesn't matter if you wind up being gay, if you wind up being trans, if who you are is who you are. But if it's okay to be anyone who wants to wear different clothing or wear, so little boys actually thinking this would be cool. I would love to be do a drag performance is not a terrible thing. Drag art is wonderful. Goes back in many cultures, in many ways. It's kabuki theater in American, Shakespeare's performance, there were drag performances. This is not this is a great American art form, I believe. And so exposing children to this is not a negative thing, but they've really been the idea that if you can make kids feel good about themselves, it is somehow a negative. And I think that is just unfortunate because, the impact it has of just kids, again, this is normal, had a good experience at this. Maybe I won't pick on a kid who's different when I am older in school. So it's not even just if you're a queer kid, just any kid, normality is everything. And so that attack has been quite specific. Robin, you've said you've written a bit about this as well, about this very specific attack against queerness and queer culture. I know there's often politically there's this idea that it's
because I think
attack.
Well, it's because they don't have a lot else to run on other than we're going to scare you about some shit. Right now they're trying to scare people about that. They're trying to scare people about crime. But I also definitely think to some degree their fear is those kids growing up and not being bullies, because then what happens to the Republican Party? I can actually, one thing I will say is that when I was a teenager, we went to the drag club all the time. When I was 15, it was an all ages club, and we would go every single weekend. That's actually how I know Pandora. But and Darian Lake and all those other people, we'd go and see them perform every weekend. And I really feel like that eventually did contribute to, at least in my high school and everything, you didn't really see that, even though it was the late 90s, you didn't really see the level of bullying that I saw at my other schools that I went to in Massachusetts when I lived there. And I think that, just generally being exposed to things and having it be it's not the end of the world, people are fine and nice, is,
Oh, yeah. And once again, you are in Arizona and you divide your time to Arizona and Los Angeles. But again, Carrie Lake, who's running for governor there, had famously attacked a drag performer, drag in general, and drag performer Barbara Seville had pointed out
to be friends with.
We were friends, and here's photos of Carrie Lake in drag,
right?
As, Elvis. And her kind of response, that was for adults, so don't involve kids in it, which is absurd because again, kids love creativity and creative play. And so could you tell the folks sort of, because when I've looked at your work and everything, it's very interesting, it's very, I don't want to compare it to just specifically kids programming, but it does feel like that of it's very ways to capture children's attention and get them involved and excited and whatever. So what's been your process because Because it seems like that's what you're sort of doing, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, we see ourselves as being an educational as well as entertaining program for children. And, as an organization, we really take pride in training our storytellers to provide those services in age appropriate ways, right? Sure, there are many versions of drag which are not appropriate for kids and which are only appropriate for adults. But that's not what we're doing when we show up to a library or we show up to a community center. We're out here reading books that are, meant for kids ages 3 to 8 or whatever is the age group that we're targeting in a particular event. We have, had conversations ourselves about how to have conversations about some of the issues that might come up in these books. We often do like to read books that deal with LGBT history, with topics of, anti-bullying, with accepting each other, with sort of finding your own voice. And we do choose those intentionally because we want kids to walk away with messages, that are empowering to them. But that's what's in a lot of children's literature already. And I really do think that these attacks on us, like you were saying, are not just an attack on queer or trans people, or they're so many of them are distractions, but they're also really a way to encourage us to kind of stay in our own lane, to do what we're told, to accept the status quo as it is. And what drag has done, again, like you were saying, for decades, for centuries, is it helps us activate our imaginations. It helps us understand that sometimes just changing the way that we present ourselves to the world actually does have an impact of, in the world around us. It actually does help us make change. It helps us envision a world that is more just and fabulous. And I think that's what they want us not to do, right? They want us to stay afraid. They want us to feel like we have no other options. Whereas really, imagination is one of our greatest tools for making the world a better place. So that, as much as we do like to see Drag Queen Story Hour as an opportunity to give kids an age-appropriate taste of queer culture or queer history, it's really about that imagination and that play and that creativity at the end of the day that again is really already there at the intersection. And these politicians, again, they want to defund public schools. They want to they're not willing to address the epidemic of gun violence in our schools. There's already so many things that they're doing to endanger.
They're defunding libraries because, oh no, there's a queer book in there somewhere. But, the entire Flowers in the Attic collection is totally fine. That's not going to tell kids to do anything crazy. That is pure and wholesome incest and what have you. But,
and camp, the extent that camp has been part of drag. I mean, The Little Mermaid, which is a big topic of discussion, but what they're more upset with the Black Mermaid, but not specifically the idea that Ursula herself is was based on a drag queen, Divine, and the performance.
Yeah, but they don't know who Divine is.
I'm sorry.
Sure,
they don't know who Divine is.
But Pat Carroll essentially it's a drag performance, and as you say, it's like just over the top, having fun, being broad. These are cool things that kids have been exposed to for years. Kids love this, and that it is somehow inappropriate for children, or that is somehow twisting children is very. And I guess what is a sticking point for me is that I'm very supportive of people who really, especially performers like yourself, who want to work with kids and help kids. Kids are very vulnerable at that point, and really they have such great imagination, such great potential. And for people who want to, as I go back to, you're just reading to children, and to target people who are just devoting their time to helping kids is a pretty sick thing. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say that, kids are vulnerable, but they're also incredibly resilient. They're also incredibly curious. They want to know about what's going on in the world around them. And I think to deny them the opportunity to know that queer and trans people exist is really just, it's factually wrong, right? It's like denying kids an ability to know about these important aspects of the world around them, simply because other people are too bigoted to pay attention or to care.
And the debate isn't about, because they framed the debate at first of like, okay, well, you let the parents decide if kids should know that queer people exist or minorities exist or anyone exists really, which is kind of weird, right? But now they're just sort of saying we don't care what parents that choose because parents are bringing their kids.
Yeah, because they want to choose for them.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's always what it's been.
So, but you are yourself a author of some children's books, right? Like a couple. It's a couple. Could you tell us about those?
Yes, I've written 2 children's books so far. The hips on the drag queen go swish, 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 and if you're a drag queen and you know it, thank you. Yes, and they're both books that introduce kids to some of the basics of what drag queens like to do, and they're sing-along books. They encourage kids, to join in, to dance along. And I wrote them that way because I didn't want to say, drag is about A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Drag is really, about how things feel in your body and about how you show up in the world. And I want kids to feel like they have some safety to experiment with these things, whether they end up wanting to be drag queens someday or not, whether they like shimmying their shoulders or swishing their hips is sort of beside the point. But it's all about trying things and knowing kind of what the plethora of options are in the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you've and this has been going, so the first was about 7 or almost 10 years ago that the first
2015.
So 7 years ago.
And when did you start to notice that there was suddenly people had kind of noticed that there was conservatives were noticing that people were enjoying themselves and had to stop it? Because
unfortunately, pretty early on. I mean, I remember I was in New York when I first started doing it. And in New York, we started getting protesters probably in 2016, 2017. Again, in San Francisco, they threw a drag ball for kids as part of Story Hour, and that had protesters show up at it, and many places around the country. So I feel like in some ways we've been the canary in the coal mine with the coming attacks on queer and trans people, and especially on trans kids. I mean, this is part of a broader attack on trans youth and gender nonconforming youth more broadly. They're trying to prevent kids from accessing bathrooms safely in schools. They're trying to prevent kids from, playing sports or even just being themselves in their own classrooms. Worse, if it was just that they were coming for the drag queens, I would say, fine, we can fight back. But really, this is part of this larger cultural war that they're trying to manufacture. We're just out here trying to live our lives and entertain and educate people, but they really want to see it as something terrible and something, And
I feel like they're purposely going after something that is like so wholesome and so freaking adorable.
Yes.
To like they're going to that and they're attacking that on purpose because they're trying to take away from the general niceness of it. Like
but we're not going to let them steal our joy. And we picking a fight with a drag queen is not something that I recommend doing.
No.
Why we're out here fighting and why we're out here speaking up against all this nonsense from people like Rubio and Carrie Lake. I want to say pick on someone your own size, but honestly, honey, we're
it's just really short,
big and bold.
Sorry.
There,
and drag, has Stonewall was a drag uprising against growth, so that goes back of really being at the forefront of this resistance towards conservative repression and government overreach over folks. But going back to your, you had responded, it was on the GLAAD Twitter feed regarding Rubio's response, but it was very formative of like, you're not actually addressing real issues. He was just, it was such a McCarthy-like ad. I drag Rubio a lot on here. Robin does. He's such a, kind of absurd figure. But this specifically was the radical left trying to destroy your kids, your family, and the way they're targeting other, as if essentially other American citizens living their lives is an active threat to you, as such a hostile, to escalation of the rhetoric is usually, I agree with Robin has always been there, but here it seems like it's just such a mean-spirited, especially given the time of the fact of the hurricane, and so when you were writing this, what was your thought of like beyond the shock? It was just sort of why, when you were thinking of how to respond.
I mean, like you were saying before, Robin, they have nothing to run on. And so they're just grasping at straws and trying to raise fear. And I just think about all the different things that are actually dangerous, actually, wrong in this country, whether that is the impending threat of climate change that we're witnessing as a hurricane is battering the state, or,
the people who don't believe in climate change.
Right. But, thinking about the epidemic of gun violence that's happening in this country, in our schools, again, I live in Arizona and I teach at the University of Arizona during the day. We just had a tragic event on our campus where a faculty member was shot and killed just this week. It's like, it's absurd, all of these things that are happening. And here Rubio is talking about drag queens reading to children rather than literally doing anything to make the world, a better, safer
because
place.
They don't have a solution to that other than thoughts and prayers. They don't have a solution to healthcare issues. They don't have a solution to like poverty or literally anything. All they can do is say, what's scary, and act like a bunch of middle school bullies. Right. Who are still mad about the same things that they were mad about when they were 13. Right. Like, oh my God, there are gay people and fat people around, and they exist, and I'm very upset about it.
Right. And I mean, and it's just like, what is so scary about a group of queens? We are out here to have a good time. We are out here to spread love and joy and fabulousness. Who doesn't want to join that party? I almost want to say, like, what's wrong with you, Marco Rubio, that you're so
they're not
afraid of this? I mean, live a little is really what it comes down to.
They've been running on that type of thing and that fear. And, someone like Carrie Lake specifically is obviously an opportunist. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, as odious as she is a true believer. So when she says something insidious or awful, when she does something, it doesn't necessarily, it's not sort of a canary in a coal mine or reflective of anything. She could just be her own person out there being terrible. But with people like Rubio and Lake, clearly they've had people focus test and bring in and decide, here's the people to pick on or bully.
Yeah.
Here's who these particular swing voters will react to it in a certain way. And these are people who are your neighbors and you might know. And how can we address that? Like, do you feel like one of the reasons I didn't want to just write something snotty about Marco Rubio and just actually talk to you and put this out here, because part of it wants to believe that we just need to expose the reality of what people are doing, and reinforcing that. And some people are going to be terrible, but it can't be that, to me, that there's a majority of the population that the majority of Americans are bullies, because I just, as cynical as I can be, I can't necessarily go on believing that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they are. I think people are good at heart. I think people want to love their neighbors, or at least respect their neighbors. And I don't know. I mean, that's why I think we just have to keep on keeping on. That's why I am trying to be out here as visible as I can be, to refute this nonsense, and to call it out for the hatred that it is, because there is no excuse for it. There is no justification.
Yeah.
Oh, he froze.
Yeah.
He froze, but she will be.
Yeah. Well, we're pre-recording, so that means we can do it like, oh, hey, there you are.
Hi, sorry about that. I don't know where you lost me.
But you were saying that we're out there mostly to just show that this is what.
Yeah.
This is not harmful. This is what is fun and a good time.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you get enough of that then? Maybe I don't need to say anymore.
But no, they are they're terrified of joy. Like, they're afraid of that, because if people are joyful, they're not going to be afraid. And if people aren't afraid, they're not going to vote Republican. Like,
right.
Yeah, so the root,
and then they won't have money.
Taking something from you. So there's an inherent sense of that. And
all we're doing is giving. I mean, we are reading to kids.
With my hair a little bit while we're doing.
Oh, that's the joy of these of the internets. But you were saying, Robin, that some of this is just making people afraid. What's interesting, the both sides argument is that the fear is that the anti-populism things, that the fear is that leftists do this as well by making you angry about. I think we've lost her, but when she returns, we'll bring her back.
Yes. Okay. I thought we were just gonna like edit. I was like
that we've lost. That we're saying that, oh, come and take something from rich people. So we're basically promoting fear, and I don't know if that's. Hey! Welcome back. Sorry, we had
what's my internet is being homophobic today too, apparently.
Yeah.
No, it was that you're just out there, kids, and it's not being fear. I was asking Robin basically this idea of there is sometimes a criticism that on the left we are trying to make people afraid by saying, oh, you should take something from rich people and whatever. We're not. It's more of just let's all share and collectively solve problems. It's like I wish you could be a great polluter, but being a polluter is not actually good for the environment, and hear this. But that's not what is happening here. It's like it feels like a lot of the rhetoric from Republicans is specifically you are scared. These people are here's what the world should be like, and people are taking from you, and more specifically making your kids different, and God forbid your kids are different, and they wouldn't be different if not for other people. And that's been a consistent theme, right? Like that's in your personal world and the people you've known. I mean, I'm sure there's been struggles between the parents or other, and the first thing is always who has convinced you to not be what our vision of you is, and that seems to be who the scapegoat for you to be different, you are being different, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, but I don't know, not to quote Lady Gaga, but I mean, we're born this way, right? Like this is who we are, and it's really, I think that's also one of the things that feels threatening about Story Hour is that we encourage kids to express their true selves and to express their true identities, and to not listen to society that tells you when you're wrong or that you're somehow broken or somehow not welcome somewhere, and instead to really stand up for yourself. And it's such a simple message, but something that all kids I think need to hear, and that so many adults in our society need to hear as well.
How long have you been doing drag performance, may I ask?
I've been performing almost 15 years now.
Okay. And when did you think of like specifically involved, of gearing it towards children, but you're a teacher, so it seems like you have a sort of early education background and training, because the way it's very focused it's very focused and geared from what I've seen online. So that is that I presume part of your training and part of what you're doing as an educator.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't really have training beyond the training that we've done through Story Hour in early childhood education. My training is more in higher ed, but in some ways, there's not a lot of a difference at the end of the day between dealing with a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds. Yes, exactly. And I've actually learned a lot from Story Hour about how to teach older kids and how to bring humor into the classroom, and how to defang serious subjects using humor and stuff like that. So it's definitely been a great learning opportunity for me as well. But yeah, like I said, Story Hour started in 2015. Before that, I had done a couple events that had, been for children in various capacities. But I think Story Hour really kind of solidified that work, not just for me, but for a lot of other performers as well.
Yeah. Have you noticed any change in how many kids are attending, more or less, since all the craziness began, or since they got super hardcore about it?
Yes and no. I mean, I think in a lot of places when people threaten us, then that really causes the community to show up and want to say, we support this programming, we support these performers, we want this in our community. And so we're going to be here, not just to sort of vote with our feet, but also to create a barrier, against these hateful people who are trying to disrupt the event. So yeah, if anything, the joke's on them, because really they're only making us stronger and only bringing more and more people out to our events.
That's good. That's good to hear. I was very concerned about the safety aspect. Robin, I think, had written about one of the drag queen being threatened by Proud Boys or something like that, and that had been a concern of mine. Given, and I'm sorry to hear about the incident on your campus, because Rubio has not contributed any of these solutions about gun violence, but there are dangerous people out there, and he will scapegoat mental illness and scapegoat, but he doesn't care about his words. And I think using your image this way as a private citizen, and other private citizens knowing what's occurred, the world we live in, it just seems I would say just sort of criminally negligent. Like, he has to know what people out there are capable of. And I just don't think he cares. I mean, you could bash this concept, you could bash trans people. He does not have to include your image in such a intentionally trying to provoke a response. Was that your take as well? Like, why is he doing that specifically? I suppose you're not shocked, right?
I'm not shocked. And I mean, in some ways, I'd rather him use my image than, pick on trans kids specifically or something like that. But yeah, I mean, in some ways it goes back to, like, the old Labor saying, an attack on one is an attack on all, right? And so I think he's coming for me, but he's really coming for a lot of us. And that's the bigger fight that I want to fight, is to really stand up and say, this is unacceptable, no matter who you're coming from. Again, pick on someone your own size, and actually show up and do your job. Come up with resolutions or get out of the way. Like, it's absurd. If it's not even if you don't have anything nice to say. It's like, he doesn't have anything to say at all, and so here he is, running his mouth on things he doesn't understand.
I mean, he's an aggressively bland person outside of, like, being
that is also true.
Well, yeah, he was intentionally. He's sort of one of the more interesting examples of. He's, as I always say, worse than Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, or people who this is who they've been and this is who they are. He is someone who's just always been following with just no moral compass. And there was a period where he and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott were supposed to represent a more diverse Republican Party, and he was supposed to be the response to Obama. He was young and had the background, and because Republicans just thought that's like, all
hey,
Obama
there's a person of color also,
and that Obama's an empty suit, so this empty suit will work. Obviously, Obama is not an empty suit, and but his rhetoric, it was a lot of obviously Reagan era, and Reagan was terrible Reagan era nonsense in 2015, 2016. But once Trump kind of rose, then he was just like, oh, well, I guess I'll be a Twitter troll, as bad as Ted Cruz, as worse, just to be someone who's just vicious. And, every problem is these other people. The radical left are freeing guns on the street, crime, and so forth. He's running against
giving the people what they want is really the creepiest aspect of it, or at least what he thinks they want.
And it's not like I'm blaming Democrats for this, but in a weird way, I'm not blaming Democrats, but it's interesting because he's running against a cop, a woman who he cannot himself demonize. It's almost like he has to go above and beyond, because it's not like running against, he would love to be running against a AOC or someone, but he's not. He's running against the, fairly mainstream traditional Democrats. It's almost like he has to amp up this rhetoric against folks like you to overcome. It's like, well, actually, this is the fight. And one question for you. So being in Arizona, obviously you're not a Lake supporter, but what are we, it's not necessarily, I'm in Oregon, and we're facing a situation where our next governor could be a Republican. So that's kind of scary, but things are kind of, Ducey was not a great it's hard to kind of clarify the difference because Ducey was a pretty terrible Republican candidate, but Lake is actually worse in very key ways.
Right.
Do you, what is your take on her? I mean, I know you're obviously trying to make sure she is not the next governor as much as any citizen can, but
yeah, I mean, I'm relatively new to Arizona, I will say, and so I'm still in the lay of the land in terms of what Arizona Republican politics look like. But yeah, from where I'm sitting and from where pretty much everyone is sitting, it is not cute right now. And we really need to do all we can to make sure that folks like Carrie Lake and some of these other clowns don't get elected into office. I mean, just the basic election denialism, the basic lack of civility, all these basic attacks on us, I think are disqualifying, to say the least. And I do also just want to say, just going back to your point a second ago too, that I don't blame Democrats for any of this, but I wouldn't mind if Democrats were to stand up for us a little bit more. I think that LGBTQ people have become one of those kind of like bases that can sort of be counted on, that don't always necessarily need to have our rights be reaffirmed or be fought for. We've seen things like the attempt to codify the right to marriage in the Senate, which is nice, but like oftentimes, especially when it comes to LGBT issues, Democrats really go for the lowest hanging fruit or the kind of like biggest, flashiest thing. But really, we need to be looking out for the people in our community who are most vulnerable, and those are, trans kids, trans women of color. And I feel like Democrats are not doing enough to stand up for them as well.
I think that they definitely need to stand up to that human rights issue. And that's been, again, part of the calculus, right? So Republicans are sort of find this vulnerable, marginalized group. I think Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg has said this as well. Pick on that group. And the idea is that you can make it a wedge because there's parts of the Democratic coalition, so your Joe Manchins or Kristen Sinema's who aren't necessarily going to be supportive, and then those who are sort of like, I don't want to talk about this or deal with it. It will cost
because I'm afraid of putting other people, and like it happens with everything, and it's like stupid is really
but
the best
to me,
word I can come up with for it.
What are you for, and what are you for as Democrats should be to protect the most vulnerable and to come out and actually affirmatively say like this is being trans is good, being non-conforming is good, prank controllers are great. Show up at a couple of them. Be part of be part of that show of support and solidarity. I think would be very important, rather than kind of avoiding the issue and say that I can protect you best if you go hide in the closet for a while and not make an issue.
And especially with like all the people being like, well, as a reasonable moderate, I think that we should really steer clear of these issues because we're going to lose people who might otherwise vote for us because, I guess like they're really good people. They're just bigots and they could vote for us if we just ignore this vulnerable group and then that vulnerable group and then all of the other groups except for white men. Heterosexual, cisgender, white men, the only neutral identity there is.
Yeah. And the work you guys are doing is very important. As I said, I think it's important to put the face to what's happening and the human element to it of who's being attacked. I think this is something actually Republicans do well in the kind of evil version, right? Like they bring out the teacher they bring out the mother who's crying. I don't want to see a woman crying, but she's crying because her kid had to read Beloved, right? And but I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've had to learn that slavery existed. I wasn't crazy to learn about it. I had to go, it's these things happened, and I think, but it gets you as a human element, and I think not just sort of trying to just do kitchen table rather than these are human beings, and to do more of that is important because I think and I would ask Val Demings and others to do this of like you know, Rubio is literally targeting people for violence, human beings, your constituents, but ultimately citizens of the United States for violence. That's just unacceptable. And as you said, inherently disqualifying. I mean, the rhetoric he has and the hatred he seems to have for people who are different. You're probably aware of this, both of you. I have loathed Rubio for a while, but specifically in 2016, he had basically said, I'm bored of the Senate. I'm not going to run again for re-election. He got, crushed, lost in his own state to Trump. Later then said, oh, I will run again. I've been motivated to do so by the Pulse shooting. And this was a shooting at a nightclub that he then leveraged as being an inspiration for him to run again to protect, even though he is virulently homophobic and virulently pro-gun. So what? But it is, and so I fundamentally loathed him from that.
I don't think that he has any actual real values or opinions on anything. I think he literally is just an empty suit going in whatever direction, he's like a Roomba or something. He's a human Roomba. He hits the wall, goes the other direction. Just going around doing whatever. He has no actual real feelings about anything, or movement in his face. Really. And I don't even think it's a Botox thing. I think it's just just naturally who he is. He's non-expressive.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I do, before you have anything to say to Phil about where they can help, how they can help, or what they can check out to learn more.
Yeah, check out dragqueenstoryhour.org or find us on social media at Drag Queen Story Hour, and show up to our events, donate to our organization, buy my books, everything that you can do, or request the books at your local libraries, request at your local library, host a story hour. The more we can do to show that there is demand for our programming, for books with LGBT and BIPOC content and creators, the better. We need more and more of this, and we need to just keep twirling and keep shimmying and keep swishing our way to the top here.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Twirling.
Rob and I will stay on for a moment to wrap up the chat, but thank you so much for joining us, and we will.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice
Same.
meeting you.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
If you were confused, this is the universal internet motion for information in the.
No, I kind of thought that's what you were doing, but I also couldn't see your fingers, so I just I think I did close. I think you got to do more that, so.
That's probably even better. Yeah. So
yes, you got to get the actual fingernail. That was just blurry knuckle is what. That is what you gave us.
I wanted to ask you for the remaining time we had about the you've probably covered a bit about the Biden pardoning, doing his Jimmy Carter, but for folks who with drug issues. So for marijuana, what so yes, it's unqualified yay from you would say?
Yes. Yes, unqualified yay. Pardon. I think everyone should be pardoned, in fact. I think anyone who has anyone who has left prison, who has served their time, should be pardoned entirely and not have it on their record anymore. So I'm happy whenever anything close to that happens. I also, I guess people are criticizing him for not pardoning people with state convictions, but he actually does not have the power to do that. So that's why he asked the governors to do it.
Yeah, that's just sort of understanding how this process works. It was hilarious to see Laura Ingraham. She had a video of folks while discussing, and everyone using pot and was Black, which according to I don't think that's entirely accurate, Robin. That
I don't think it is.
I don't have the stat in front of
I'm
me.
pretty sure
I
it's
do not
not.
believe that Black people are the only ones who smoke pot. And this is sort of and linking it to crime and linking it like these reefer heads will go out and
freaking insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people are just like smoking a ton of pot and then going out and doing crime. That's a thing that happens regularly. Like, no, they're hanging out on the couch.
And I think a lot of Fox News is sort of he's pandering to his base, but this is not really a base issue. It's like
Literally 86% of the country thinks that the drug war was a bad idea. 68% of the country wants to see marijuana legalized. I don't even smoke pot. I want to legalize because I'm not a crazy person. I think I actually like this because they are like they're being pushed into a corner where like no one has a problem with pot anymore, and they're trying to scare people about marijuana when like everyone, like almost everyone at this point is like, you're not gonna have a lot of people who haven't ever smoked pot. There's not like appealing like, oh wow, people smoking pot, that they are dangerous and scary.
Also like alcohol prohibition. So I think some of the responses have been, oh, here are the dangers of marijuana. It could do this. And before you even get into the science of it, I mean, they've done studies. Alcohol is not necessarily good for you, even in moderation.
Yeah.
It is in certain ways almost
except for red wine every other month. They just wine, like they decide like, oh, it's really good for you. Oh, it's bad for you. Oh, it's good for you. Same thing with like, I forget what. There's a couple things like that. Coffee is sometimes good for you, sometimes bad for you.
Yes, the studies are never. They are often completely, but certain things of like the reason I'm not drinking and have poorer health than someone who is drinking is because I'm either a recovering alcoholic, so I've already have the problems of having excessive alcohol consumption, or I literally can't afford to drink. So if you are poor, it tends to be that poor people have not the best health outcomes than people with more, disposable income. So there's tons of, but I guess my larger point being that regardless of what marijuana's actual health benefit, doesn't have to actually be a positive health-wise for people to not be thrown in prison.
Yeah, and exactly. Like candy isn't good for you, but no, people should not be in prison for eating candy or selling candy. It's just it's absolutely sickening. And no, I think that there really just aren't people anymore who really think, oh, people with marijuana convictions need to pay for that for the rest of their lives. Like, I don't think that those people exist outside of people on Fox News trying to make that happen. Like,
no, I mean, they don't want to suffer. I mean, obviously, they want to link everything to crimes. Again, as we're discussing, the drag crime, this crime, everything about the world is going to be terrible and scary unless you put us in charge forever. So
yeah, but I actually think I think that we should push them into saying as many stupid things about pot as humanly possible. Like, just let them go. Let them like run free, absolutely run with this, and just talk about how scary and dangerous pot is and how people should just be locked up forever for smoking pot. Do it. I challenge them. Like,
yeah, it's not I don't think it's a major swing, but it's whenever they talk about Biden pandering to his base per se, it's just like he's just doing something that's popular is actually a good thing to do. Speaking, we obviously haven't had a chance to chat because we've been on opposite schedules the past few days about Herschel Walker's having paid for an abortion, which is the least shocking thing ever. And
oh no, you can leave it. I sure can't.
And I get it. It's sort of there's been dumb arguments. So Ben Shapiro was like, oh well, you're only upset about this because he's anti-abortion. It's like, well, yes. I mean, hypocrisy is
you don't
sort of the
actually
thing.
have a problem with people having abortions or paying for abortions. That's not a problem. The problem is the hypocrisy. So yeah, and they don't have a problem with it because they don't actually care about abortion.
You know, and there are some sort of Al Franken dead enders who say this is an example. Well, Democrats should have stuck by him regardless. But my issue about
trending because the Dinesh D'Souza thing where he was like, this would have never, affected a like Democrats stand by people, but no matter what, and everyone was like, oh, Al Franken,
Well,
so.
And I think the issue there also is that this was specifically an issue within, if you're accused of, this was something that was very important to the Democratic base and sort of issues, and that is obviously not something that you want to promote. And so similarly for Republicans, it was kind of like, well, yes, in theory, they should be the most upset about this than anyone. And to suddenly be like, well, it was legal at the time is just nuts. You have like Republicans saying, well, it was legal at the time. It's like, well, you believe this is murder. You believe he committed a contract killing. You are writing laws in which I could sue him.
Yeah.
I could sue him in Texas for for the grounds that he has committed
$10,000 be yours.
Yeah, he did the abortion get well card, which was and signed it.
But at least he wrote a get well card. Not everyone does that.
He wrote a check.
Very thoughtful.
He wrote a check for $700,000. $700, and I said, because that $700,000 would make sense. He wrote a check for $700,000. That is the
most expensive abortion. That is a gold-plated abortion.
So he wrote a check for $700. He probably has enough money in his bank account to get $700 in cash from an ATM.
Yeah,
limited. So probably that's something you would probably pay for in cash or give to her in cash rather than write a check. But he's not the brightest guy. He's but yeah, look, I get it. I get why Republicans are like, we side by the guy who is going to deliver for us. So
they danced with the one what brought them. Of course, they were never going to turn on him, and it would be entirely naive to assume that they would, because they don't like I was saying on Twitter, they're not bothered by a man paying for an abortion. They are not bothered by abortion in and of itself for the most part. They are angry at women for getting away with something they don't think women should be getting away with, which is having sex that they don't think that those women should be having, and enjoying that sex, and then also, avoiding the their punishment of getting married and having a baby. And so that's actually one thing is that was reminding me of this whole thing is I watched some terrible Greg Gutfeld segment that aired on Thursday night, not last night, that was about the news that women are getting more liberal, but men are getting more conservative. What? And part of their reasoning was that women are they're not getting married young enough and they're not having babies, and they're avoiding that conservatizing influence of having a baby. And so there's a part of them that thinks that forcing women to have babies is good for them politically, because they think that that'll calm a woman down and make her a good, not evil, not a Jezebel or what have you, going around seducing men instead of protecting their purity, as is her job as a woman, as we all know.
And they're talking about white women, right? Because white women are the ones for whom college, marriage, children have direct impacts on, the makes them more conservative, whether you went to college or not, if you did, which is not particularly true for women of color, specifically Black women, who have no time for Republicans from regardless of background or whatever. It is one of those interesting facts that I don't think gets focused on a lot, because Democrats will then say, how can we reach working class people? It's like, well, you do reach working class people.
Yeah.
So your problem.
Well, they say working class people, they mean white people.
Yes. Well, as I said, like, probably not having leaders who are, this is something I meant to bring up earlier during the chat, was because I was writing something about Carrie Lake, and it's what's scary because we talk about, groomerism, but the youth movement within MAGA, so many Donald Trump 20-somethings who are so into, I would say, amongst 20-something white people, to find he's more popular than probably Obama is still. Like, it's sort of like there is sort of the peak Obama mania celebrity from 2008 exists for Trump amongst white men, has been enduring. Like, he's like the Beatles among them and an idol among them. And Lake is, because a lot of the ones she has rejected sort of the mainstream consultants, the Republican consultants, and brought in these guys. And again, there's this youth movement that Democrats are ignoring and just think like, well, young people are stupid, and let me just yell at David Hogg on Twitter and not get these young people back. And that seems to me to be scary, because every fascist movement is youth generated, and young people are you see young people part of this election denying campaign and being generated, and sort of the youthful energy of her campaign is a little scary. The cleverness in certain ways. So she's like, she's being outspent by Katie Hobbs, like 7-1, but she thinks she doesn't need to spend money to get airtime. She realizes, go and see Bannon, I will pick, and this is deliberate, she'll go pick a fight with the press or do some event that's controversial, and then that becomes free airtime and free. And
I mean, I just felt like her press people for a minute were sending out, like, I'm sure you got it as well, like 2 press releases a day about whatever bullshit she was on about. Like, it was,
and I just don't, I've got nothing from Katie Hobbs other than for her, if you are in Arizona and like, here's my list of bipartisan achievements, Carrie Lake is dangerous type stuff, but no sense of out there being angry. And it's this weird, there are defenders of this who will say, Democrats have to be responsible and adults in the room. That's your favorite term, the adults in the room. But it doesn't, because if you were to say, oh, democracy is at the fate of the country is at stake, democracy at stake, whose Twitter feed seems to indicate that? Because it's, the people who are angry are the Republicans, and they're presenting that anger, and Democrats should be angry, right? And as someone is,
like, do you think there's a perception that like it's better to be positive, but I actually don't think that that's true.
No, it's passionate that matters. Passion is what in people, and solving your problem, right? So when the world, sure, Obama could run a specific type of campaign in 2008, hope and change. And what will inspire me is that I can I'm going to be able to make the world better. I'm going to get health care, but also this is a new form of government. I can fix things. And if you're someone of that type who wants to do that, that's exciting at the time. But when you can't run that playbook, right? When you've lost, people have stripped away your right to vote, you've lost bodily autonomy in many states, you should be angry. So like the favorites among many centrists like Lauren Underwood and Sharice Davids, these are, have nothing against these politicians. I'm saying their feed does not appear that they are angry. Like, why is Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene angrier and more passionate and more out there than these two? And everyone will say somehow it's AOC's the fault because that's why no one's booking. But it to me, it's like there's an issue of we're not leveraging the media effectively.
Yeah.
Like there will be often a conversation
the
of
media,
where
which we're supposed to run, mind you.
well, I've often stated,
and you and I are sort of a part of.
we're
that like our own thing.
We really need a Fox News, and liberals will always say, well, Democrats are too good to have a Fox News. We don't believe in lies and fake news. It's like, well, no, what you need is a rapid response.
Yeah.
Media outlet that will put out your issues daily, make things, as you were saying, what we're trying to do when we had Lil Miss Hot Mess here is to put faces to make issues. Here's what you'd be upset about. Here's what you're talking about. That Fox News does that very well. And the idea that the only way you could do that is to just tell lies. So no, we'd be telling the truth. Fox News is telling lies because they're evil. We don't have to do that. We just need to be doing our own version of, because the perception that good journalism is objective then leads to the liberal outlets will say, okay, we'll bring you on. And now we will have to talk about, okay, well, is that going to play in Peoria? That's going to be
now we have to bring on someone who hates you. Like, just for balance.
Yeah.
Let's bring on a crazy random bigot we found on the street. He'll yell that, start screaming at people about, accepting Jesus Christ as their personal savior. Balance.
And this goes back to the youth argument. And I know, again, some folks, I'd shared an article about saying that the whole thing of Democrats need to embrace youth war, perhaps not have everyone who over 1,000 years old running things, like young, at least a younger mindset to compete with Republicans who do. And, people have the typical response to that of like, no, wait your turn, it's good. But what's evident is that is problems of you get people responding to my sense of, well, here's what we need, a liberal rapid response. And it's like, well, we tried that with Air America. And it's like, that was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And very good. Like that happens a lot to me in theater. You're on a board. It's like the person who's been on this board forever. And I was like, okay, can we just stop killing? I remember once at this board meeting, I was like, can we just stop killing trees and start I don't want to get like the 50-page flyer about the new season. Just send me, on an email or whatever. And it's like, oh, we tried that to try to get people to do their emails. It's like, when? I was like, that was like 2001. It's like the AOL times of like, you get fossilized in something.
We to all the Hotmail accounts.
Yeah. It's like, well, also AM radio is not particularly your audience that could probably pick up on it. What's happened since is there's been podcasts that have occurred since Air America has gone out. Young people with that. Talk shows, like political talk shows, are much more popular now. So there's totally an opportunity where you could have like an evening of, Samantha Bee or someone talking about these issues, bringing on politicians, where it's not just bring out a politician for one segment, but a whole multiple segments of doing that and really reinforcing and selling liberal policies. Because until we do that, we're getting killed. I mean,
we're letting them set the narrative, and then we're responding to it and being, and yes, there is some value in being like, everything you say is stupid and terrible. But at the same time, we need a little bit more than that. Sadly, we can't always agree on what that is, but
yes, but
at least like open discussion of that, I think, is good. A lot of people shy away from that, and they're like, oh no, well, if we discuss those issues and the differences that we have, that'll be off-putting to people. But I actually think it's they're interesting conversations to have.
Absolutely.
Like, as long as people are both like, as long as both sides are like, I care about human beings and want the best for them, rather than like, arguing with a Republican where they're like, I actually hate people and want them to be sad and miserable, except for like these 5 people who are okay.
Yeah. And I think there can be a disagreement. I'm not necessarily one who's going to be in the pocket for for the Democratic Party as a party, and like I'm not going to be the Sean
Mhm.
Hannity of something. That's not my jam, or I think your jam. But
Yeah.
I do think even just hitting liberal issues night after night, breaking and in a way that's easily digestible and that is
Mhm.
humanizing and not kind of what
And
MSC
that, quite
is
frankly,
doing.
involves paying people, because there are a lot of people doing a whole lot of unpaid labor, especially Black women, on social media and everything. And, it would be pretty awesome if we had like more of an infrastructure that allowed for the same sort of creation of not
Mhm.
necessarily, personalities and hosts and like pundits and everything who
Oh
aren't like
yeah.
the same people forever.
Well, when Donald Trump won, there was this whole thing of, oh, how did we miss this? We need to. It became like this affirmative action for every sort of conservative or bringing
Mhm.
in more. Granted, it was Barry Weiss of all people. I don't know how she's going to tell you about working class people, but brought onto the Times, all those sort of times, and like, well, you have the first woman and first Black woman vice president, and I don't think that you wound up. I don't think any major publication is like, oh, well, we need to get rid of Brett Stevens and bring on a Black woman columnist to write about this, because obviously it's going to be a time where how do you cover a Black,
Mhm.
the second most powerful person in the country is a Black woman. There's
Yeah.
no response to that, and that is frustrating. You said like why haven't there been more opportunities for Black women as a result of
Mhm.
this happening in the past few years, or the fact of um it's still mostly white cis men talking about the challenges impacting trans people, queer people, people losing their bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
And when that's the case, then it's just removed, right? So March of
Mhm.
the Green is like, well, I have skin in the game because I am a white Christian fundamentalist woman who believes that
Mhm.
who hates modernity, and I'm expressing my concerns from a firsthand basis. It's going to resonate more both with the people who share my fears, but with anyone else. And instead, you just get, a lot of folks who aren't facing directly those challenges
Yeah.
trying to advocate for them. So it's like what I call the Chris Coons theory. So it's like, I don't know how effective Chris Coons is going to be about those concerns.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway.
But, people get scared and it's like, oh, well, a white cis man is always going to be, the neutral. And I think there's also like a whole thing like, well, how dare you say that like we can't respond to that also? And yeah, sure, everyone can respond to everything. But I try and think like a lot of the time, like, is my voice the voice that is needed on this particular subject? And learning to shut up was actually, on occasion, was very difficult for me. Because it is not, I will tell you, it is not in my nature to shut up as a person. But sometimes, I'd say like, okay, maybe this is not me. Maybe this is not my topic. I'll let other people handle this for now. Maybe I'll come in a little bit later and say something once, like, but, I think it's important to have that kind of like judgment on things.
Absolutely. I think that's very important. I think we're coming up on time here, but thank you for making time to join us for this special interview. And,
Yes, which is
chat.
definitely taking place on a Sunday.
Yes. Well, we just build them. I just build them as chats. I make no
Yeah,
promise that anything is live, but I do want people to participate and have the comments and talk and
I know.
like
I'm
and
just teasing.
subscribe. But I actually love your winks that ever gives
I
everyone.
actually just got good at winking, and I'm honestly like, I'm very excited about that. I
It's
practiced
very,
for hours because I had
very,
such a bad wink.
very Lucille Bluth, so it's
Yeah.
wonderful. So yeah, well, thanks everyone. We will see you back again soon. Please like, share, subscribe, check out the Wonkette Patreon. Just throw us a few bucks for this.
Yes, give us money. We like money. Um, Money makes the world go round.
Yeah.
Bye.